What if the system that once rejected you became the very thing you transformed? Today, I'm sharing the remarkable story of Zara Malik, a journey that will challenge everything you believe about education, resilience, and the power of a single determined mind. By the end of this narrative, you'll understand how one girl's rejection became the catalyst for revolutionizing an entire educational framework. Listen to discover how someone turned their deepest wound into their greatest purpose, and how you might find similar transformation in your own challenges. The rain fell in unforgiving sheets the morning 10-year-old Zara Malik stood at the gates of Westfield Academy. Water dripped from her second-hand uniform, meticulously pressed at night before by hands too small for such responsibility. She clutched a plastic folder containing every document she'd managed to gather: a birth certificate with coffee stains at the edges, medical records with missing pages, and recommendation letters from the community center where she'd taught herself to read. "I'm sorry," said the administrator, barely looking up from her computer. "Without a parent or guardian signature and proper residential documentation, we simply cannot process your application." "But I don't have parents," Zara explained, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I live at Greenway Children's Home. Miss Patterson signed everything as my guardian." The administrator frowned at the signature. "This isn't sufficient. We need legal guardianship papers, proof of address within our district boundaries, and the full registration fee." School policy. Behind the administrator stood the school's marble entrance hall, with its polished floors and walls adorned with photographs of smiling students in press uniforms. Children brushed past, laughing and chattering, carrying backpacks filled with possibilities. "I've been teaching myself," Zara offered, pulling out a notebook filled with careful handwriting. Math problems she copied from discarded workbooks, vocabulary lists memorized from donated dictionaries. "I'm already through 5th grade material. I can show you." The administrator's expression softened momentarily before hardening back into professional detachment. "It's not about ability. It's about procedure. Rules exist for a reason." As Zara turned away, folder pressed against her chest like a shield, she caught sight of herself in the reflective doors. Small frame, determined eyes, completely alone. The rejection wasn't personal. It was systemic. But understanding this offered no comfort as she walked back through the rain, education remaining as distant as the parents she couldn't remember. At Greenway Children's Home, Miss Patterson, overworked and managing 43 children with minimal resources, tried her best. "We'll try another school," she promised, though they both knew the outcome would be the same. Public schools were overcrowded and underfunded. Private institutions had waiting lists and fees beyond their reach. The few scholarship programs required documentation Zara simply didn't have. "Maybe next year," Miss Patterson said, the same word she'd been repeating since Zara arrived at the home 3 years earlier. But Zara stopped waiting for permission to learn. That evening, she created her own classroom in the storage closet under the stairs, a flashlight balanced on boxes, salvage books organized by subject, and a strict self-imposed schedule. Mathematics from 7 to 8 a.m., literature until breakfast, sciences whenever she could find materials. The other children began calling her Professor, half mocking until they realized she could help with the homework they brought back from the schools they were allowed to attend. Soon, the closet under the stairs became a makeshift tutoring center. "Why do you keep trying?" asked Marcus, a 14-year-old who had already given up on his own education. "They don't want us in their schools." "Because they don't get to decide what's in my head," Zara replied, using a piece of chalk to demonstrate algebraic equations on the wall. "And someday, I'll build a place where no one gets turned away." When social services conducted their monthly inspection, they discovered Zara's underground academy. Instead of shutting it down, an impressed case worker connected her with an online education program designed for children in unusual circumstances. It wasn't a real school. No classmates, no teacher interaction, just modules to complete and automated assessments. But it was something official, a foothold in the system. By 12, Zara had completed all available courses, her academic progress vastly outpacing her social opportunities. While other children played sports and attended school dances, she devoured university textbooks found at thrift stores and taught herself coding through public library computers. Ms. Patterson watched with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're brilliant, Zara, but childhood only comes once." "I'm not missing childhood," Zara responded while helping another resident with reading comprehension. "I'm building something different." At 14, through a community advocate who recognized her exceptional abilities, Zara secured a hardship examination that allowed her to earn a high school equivalency certificate. 3 years early and with the highest scores the testing center had seen. The local newspaper ran a small feature, "Orphan achieves academic success despite barriers." The article caught the attention of Dr. Eleanor Hammond, founder of an educational innovation foundation, who arranged to meet Zara. "The system failed you," Dr. Hammond stated plainly during their first meeting at a community center cafe. "What would you change about it if you could?" Zara didn't hesitate. "Everything. I'd make education something you can't be denied. Big dreams require strategic planning," Dr. Hammond said, sliding a brochure across the table. It described a specialized fellowship program for educational entrepreneurs, typically reserved for graduate students, but occasionally open to exceptional cases. "I'm offering you a spot," Dr. Hammond explained. "It includes mentorship, educational opportunities, and eventual seed funding for initiatives that reimagine learning access." That evening, returning to Greenway, Zara stood once more at the gates of Westfield Academy. Closed now, silent. The rain had stopped, but puddles remained, reflecting streetlights like possibilities waiting to be recognized. She placed her hand against the cold metal bars, remembering the feeling of rejection, but understanding now what she couldn't then. Systems are designed by people, and what people design, people can redesign. "I'm coming back," she whispered, not as a student seeking admission, but as something far more powerful, an architect of change preparing to rebuild from the foundation up. As the streetlight above flickered, casting shifting shadows across the school's imposing facade, Zara made a promise not just to herself, but to every child standing at closed gates with documents deemed insufficient and dreams deemed inconvenient. The rejection that was meant to limit her had instead defined her purpose. Where the system saw an orphan with incomplete paperwork, she now saw herself as a solution to a broken equation, the variable that would transform the entire formula. And as she turned away from Westfield Academy for the second time, the difference was clear. 5 years earlier, she had left in defeat. Tonight, she walked away with determination and a plan. Dr. Hammond's fellowship opened doors that Zara had never imagined existed. At 16, while her peers navigate high school hallways, she found herself in innovation labs and educational think tanks, her perspective as a system outsider proving invaluable in conversations typically dominated by those who had succeeded within traditional frameworks. "The problem," Zara explained during her first fellowship presentation, "isn't just about access. It's about how we define legitimacy in learning. Who decides what documentation matters more than knowledge? Who determines which children deserve structured education and which must teach themselves in closets with borrowed books?" Her words resonated particularly with Elijah Washington, a tech entrepreneur who had built his fortune developing educational platforms, but had grown disillusioned with their limited reach. "Technology alone won't fix systemic exclusion," he admitted after Zara's presentation. "We need to reimagine the entire approach." Together, they began developing what Zara called the Open Gateway model, a hybrid educational system combining physical learning centers, digital platforms, and community-based knowledge exchange. The model eliminated traditional enrollment barriers while maintaining educational quality through innovative assessment approaches. But theories and prototypes weren't enough. Zara needed real-world implementation data, which meant returning to where her journey began, Greenway Children's Home and the surrounding community. "You want to use the community center as a pilot location?" Ms. Patterson asked skeptically when Zara proposed the idea. "With what funding?" "We have grant money," Zara explained, now 17 and speaking with the confidence of someone who had spent years navigating institutional politics. "But more importantly, we have a model that works for children like me, like us." The pilot program began with 20 children who, for various reasons, existed in educational limbo, lacking documentation, housing stability, or the financial resources required by traditional schools. The curriculum combined self-paced digital learning with community expert mentorship and collaborative project work. Marcus, now working at a local garage after dropping out years earlier, volunteered to teach practical mathematics through automotive repair. School never made sense to me because numbers on a page seemed pointless, he explained to children gathered around an engine. But this is math that matters. The pilot faced immediate challenges. Local school administrators viewed the project as criticism of their institutions rather than as complementary support. Regulatory agencies questioned the program's legitimacy without traditional credentialing. Some community members worried about the stigma of alternative education diminishing their children's future prospects. They're missing the point, Zara confided to Dr. Hammond during a particularly difficult week. We're not competing with traditional schools. We're catching everyone they drop. As the first cohort of students began demonstrating remarkable progress, capturing data became Zara's obsession. She documented everything: learning velocities across different subjects, correlation between environmental stability and information retention, impact of trauma-informed teaching practices on student engagement. The resulting research paper, co-authored with Dr. Hammond, caught the attention of educational reformers nationwide. By 19, Zara had expanded the pilot to 5 locations across the state, each serving children existing in educational margins. The open gateway model was proving particularly effective for youth in foster care, homeless students, undocumented immigrants, and those with learning differences unaccommodated by standard classrooms. When Elijah Washington suffered a heart attack at 43, his near-death experience prompted a profound reevaluation of his legacy. "I built software used by millions," he told Zara from his hospital bed. "But what have I truly changed? What systems have I actually reformed rather than simply digitized?" Upon recovery, he made a decision that would alter the trajectory of both their work. Washington would devote half his considerable fortune to establishing the Gateway Foundation with Zara as its educational director. At 21, she became responsible for implementing systemic change with resources few educational reformers ever access. "This isn't charity," Zara clarified in her first press conference, uncomfortable with the media's framing of her as a rags-to-riches prodigy. "This is strategic investment in educational justice. Every child denied education represents lost potential, lost innovation, lost solutions to problems we haven't even identified yet." The Gateway Foundation began acquiring struggling private schools, transforming them into hybrid institutions that maintain academic excellence while eliminating traditional barriers. Each school operated on a unique economic model. Families with financial means paid tuition that subsidized spots for those without resources. Corporate partnerships funded specialized training programs, and community involvement reduced operational costs. Zara personally oversaw the transformation of Westfield Academy, the very institution that had rejected her years earlier. The school's administrator, still employed there, didn't recognize a poised young woman in business attire who arrived to discuss the acquisition. "We have certain standards," the administrator explained when Zara outlined planned changes to admission policies. "Our legacy families expect a particular environment." "I understand completely," Zara replied with a calm smile. "That's why the transition will be gradual. But make no mistake, transition will occur." Only during the contract signing did recognition flash across the administrator's face. "You're that girl, the one without proper documentation, from the children's home." "Yes," Zara acknowledged, signing the final acquisition papers. "I'm that girl who needed education and was told policies mattered more than people. Now I make the policies." The Gateway Foundation's approach sparked intense debate within educational circles. Critics called it unsustainable idealism. Supporters hailed it as necessary disruption of calcified systems. Zara remained focused on measurable outcomes: attendance rates, knowledge acquisition, psychological well-being, and post-graduation trajectories. At 23, Zara found herself addressing the National Education Summit, the youngest keynote speaker in the event's history. Looking out at the audience of policymakers, administrators, and corporate stakeholders, she recognized the weight of the moment. "We've been asking the wrong question," she began. "For decades, we've asked how to improve our educational system. But the fundamental question should be, who is our educational system actually designed to serve? And more importantly, who is it designed to exclude?" As she spoke, Screens behind her displayed data from gateway schools across the country, demonstrating how removing bureaucratic barriers while maintaining academic rigor had produced extraordinary results, particularly among previously marginalized populations. The tragedy isn't just that we've denied education to countless children through arbitrary requirements, she continued. It's that we denied ourselves the benefit of their potential contributions. How many solutions, inventions, and insights have we lost because we decided certain children didn't deserve to learn? In the audience sat the current director of Greenway Children's Home, invited personally by Zara, alongside 5 current residents who are now enrolled in gateway schools. For them, Zara wasn't an abstract success story. She was living proof that circumstances of birth need not determine access to knowledge. The summit marked a turning point in public discourse around educational access. Major districts began adopting modified versions of the gateway model, particularly its innovative documentation alternatives and flexible learning pathways. Corporate partners, seeing the untapped talent pool Gateway was developing, provided substantial funding for expansion. As her 25th birthday approached, Zara stood on the cusp of her most ambitious move yet, one that would either cement her educational revolution or expose its limitations. The Gateway Foundation had quietly been acquiring shares in the largest private educational management organizations in the country, positioning itself for a series of strategic mergers that would effectively create the most influential educational entity in the nation. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Hammond asked as they finalized the strategy. "This level of consolidation will draw significant opposition." Zara looked out the window of the Foundation's headquarters, watching children enter the Learning Center below. Children from every background, circumstance, and starting point, all engaging with education designed to meet them where they were. "I'm not interested in building an empire," she answered. "I'm interested in dismantling barriers. Sometimes the most effective way to change a system is from within." The plan was set in motion, a calculated series of acquisitions and partnerships that would culminate in control of over 30% of the country's private educational infrastructure, with sufficient influence to impact public policy at both state and federal levels. As the financial markets began responding to rumors of the impending moves, Zara returned to Greenway Children's Home for their annual community dinner, grounding herself in the reality that had shaped her mission. There, surrounded by children facing the same barriers she once had, she renewed her commitment to creating an educational landscape where no child would ever again be told they lacked the right documentation to learn. The transformation was almost complete, but the true test of her vision still lay ahead. The business headlines that winter morning were unequivocal. Educational breakthrough. Gateway Foundation completes historic acquisition series. The financial press focused on the numbers. The billions invested, market percentages captured, projected revenue streams. Few recognized the deeper significance of what had just occurred. A fundamental shift in who controlled educational access across the nation. In her minimalist office overlooking the city, Zara sat with Dr. Hammond and the Gateway Foundation's board, watching the news coverage with quiet resolve. They weren't celebrating. Not yet. Acquisition was merely a tool. Transformation was the actual work ahead. "Today," Zara addressed the assembled leadership team, "we've gained capacity to implement change at scale. Tomorrow, we begin dismantling the very barriers that made this intervention necessary." The first directive issued under the new educational consortium was deceptively simple. Every institution within the Gateway network would immediately adopt the Documentation Alternatives Program, a protocol allowing students to enroll through multiple verification pathways beyond traditional paperwork requirements. "We're not lowering standards," Zara clarified in the press conference announcing the changes. "We're acknowledging that brilliance, potential, and worthiness exist regardless of bureaucratic recognition. The burden of proof should rest with the system, not with 10-year-old children." The backlash was immediate and severe. Competing educational institutions accused Gateway of undermining educational integrity. Conservative policy groups filed lawsuits claiming the new standards violated regulatory requirements. Several high-profile families withdrew their children, citing concerns about maintaining educational excellence. Inside Gateway headquarters, the team had anticipated every objection. "This resistance isn't about educational quality," Zara reminded her increasingly anxious staff. "It's about perceived exclusivity." When access becomes universal, those who benefited from scarcity feel threatened. The data told a different story than the critics claimed. Within 6 months of implementing the Documentation Alternatives program, gateway schools showed increased academic performance across all metrics, not despite their new inclusion policies, but because of them. The infusion of previously excluded students brought diverse perspectives, different problem-solving approaches, and heightened classroom engagement. We're not just changing who gets educated, Zara explained to skeptical investors. We're changing how education happens. Homogeneity breeds intellectual stagnation. Diversity drives innovation. This isn't charity, it's competitive advantage. By the time Zara turned 26, the Gateway model had proven itself financially and academically sustainable. The lawsuits were dismissed, regulatory bodies began adopting Gateway's alternative verification standards as best practices, and even competing institutions started implementing similar approaches. But for Zara, these changes represented only the beginning. At a private strategy meeting with her core leadership team, she unveiled the next phase, the Community Knowledge Initiative. Traditional schools treat communities as passive recipients of educational services, she explained. We're going to invert that relationship. Every Gateway facility will become a two-way knowledge exchange, not just teaching children, but learning from and with their communities. The initiative reorganized schools as community hubs where local knowledge holders, from tradespeople to cultural elders, were integrated into curriculum development and teaching. Parents working multiple jobs could contribute recordings about their professional expertise rather than attending traditional parent-teacher meetings. Community challenges became learning opportunities through project-based curricula. At the Westfield Academy, now Westfield Community Learning Center, the administrator who had once turned Zara away served as the implementation coordinator for these changes. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. I didn't understand then what I understand now, she admitted to Zara during a curriculum planning session. I thought I was protecting standards. In reality, I was perpetuating exclusion. Understanding is the first step toward transformation, Zara replied without bitterness. That's why you're still here. The Community Knowledge Initiative proved particularly revolutionary in historically marginalized neighborhoods, where residents possessed rich expertise that traditional educational frameworks had long devalued. Gateway schools began documenting community wisdom, creating living digital archives of local knowledge, while simultaneously providing formal education. At 27, as these innovations gained momentum, Zara faced an unexpected personal challenge. Years of relentless work had taken a physical toll, resulting in a collapse during a board meeting and subsequent diagnosis of exhaustion and stress-related health issues. You've built systems to sustain educational transformation, Dr. Hammond observed during a hospital visit, but you haven't built systems to sustain yourself. The insight prompted Zara to implement what she called her succession philosophy, identifying and developing leadership from within the very communities Gateways served. She established the Future Educational Leaders Program, providing accelerated pathways for promising students from marginalized backgrounds to assume organizational leadership roles. I was never meant to be exceptional, she explained to the first cohort of future leaders. I was meant to prove that potential exists everywhere, waiting for opportunity. You are not here to become me. You're here to become yourselves, with all the structural support I never had. As Zara gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations, the Gateway Foundation entered its most ambitious phase yet, challenging the fundamental economics of education to the Knowledge Equity Initiative. The initiative introduced a revolutionary financial model. Educational institutions will remain free at point of access, with costs covered through a combination of progressive private funding, corporate workforce development partnerships, and a pioneering knowledge dividend system where graduates contributed a small percentage of their income once employed, not as debt repayment, but as investment in the next generation. Education should never be an individual debt burden. Zara testified before a congressional hearing on educational financing. It's a collective investment with collective returns. We've commodified knowledge to our detriment as society. The initiative faced fierce opposition from traditional lending institutions and universities dependent on tuition models. Yet as data emerged showing Gateway graduates entering the workforce with zero debt, higher employment rates, and stronger community connections, public support grew exponentially. By 30, Zara had accomplished what many considered impossible, creating an educational ecosystem that was simultaneously academically rigorous, universally accessible, financially sustainable, and community-centered. The system that had once rejected her now operated according to principles she had architected. On a rainy morning mirroring the day of her original rejection 15 years earlier, Zara returned to Westfield. This time, she didn't stand at the gates, but walked through them, past students from every background engaged in collaborative learning. In the central courtyard, a new building was under construction, the Zara Malik Center for Educational Justice. "We named it without your permission," admitted the former administrator, now a devoted advocate for Gateway's approach. The students insisted. Zara ran her hand along the construction barrier, remembering the plastic folder clutched against her chest, the feeling of rain soaking through her second-hand uniform, the steady voice telling her she lacked the proper documentation to learn. "This building will house our Documentation Alternatives Program headquarters," the administrator continued. "Every difficult case, every child with non-standard paperwork, every situation requiring flexibility, they'll all come here for resolution." A small girl approached, clipboard in hand, clearly working on a project. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Ms. Malik? I'm doing my community impact project on educational access. Would you talk with me about how systems change?" Looking at the girl, confident, curious, belonging, Zara recognized the culmination of her work. This child wasn't fighting for entry. She was already inside, already learning, already studying how to create change herself. "Systems change," Zara began, sitting beside the girl on a nearby bench, "when we stop accepting that barriers are natural or necessary. Change happens when we recognize that systems are made by people for people and can be remade when they fail to serve their purpose." As they talked, students and teachers moved around them, engaged in the business of learning, unaware that the woman sitting on the bench had transformed the very ground beneath their feet. Later that afternoon, Zara visited Greenway Children's Home, where a Gateway Learning Center now operated on-site. Children who had once been educational afterthoughts were now at the center of carefully designed learning experiences tailored to their unique circumstances and strengths. Ms. Patterson, now retired but still volunteering, greeted her with a warm embrace. "Remember Marcus?" she asked. "He's the automotive technology instructor now. And that closet under the stairs? We've preserved it, turned it into a little museum of sorts. Where Gateway began, we call it." In the administrative office, Zara noticed a framed news article. "Orphan achieves academic success despite barriers." Beside it hung a more recent headline: "Gateway model transforms national education landscape." "You did exactly what you said you would," Ms. Patterson noted. "You built a place where no one gets turned away." "Not me," Zara corrected her. "We did. All of us who recognize that education isn't a privilege to be earned through proper documentation, but a right to be protected and expanded." That evening, in her apartment overlooking the city, Zara drafted the final component of her educational revolution, the Gateway Open Source Initiative, the complete framework of the Gateway model. Its alternative documentation protocols, community knowledge systems, financial models, and learning methodologies would be made freely available to educational institutions worldwide. "The ultimate goal was never ownership," she wrote in the initiative's preamble. "It was transformation. Systems change isn't complete until it becomes both universal and irreversible." As rain tapped against her windows, the same rain that had once symbolized rejection and isolation, Zara reflected on the journey from exclusion to revolution. The system that had once deemed her unworthy of entry now operated according to principles she had designed. The gates that had once been closed were permanently open. But more importantly, children who would have once stood where she stood, documentation deemed insufficient, potential unrecognized, now walked directly through those gates, not as exceptions but as expected and welcomed learners. The greatest achievement wasn't that she had bought the system, but that she had fundamentally changed what the system valued. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Hammond. The board approved the open source initiative unanimously. Implementation begins next month. Zara smiled, thinking of the 10-year-old girl she had been, standing in the rain with a plastic folder of incomplete documentation. That girl could never have imagined the future that rejection would ultimately create. Not just for herself, but for countless children who would never know what it meant to be deemed unworthy of knowledge. The revolution wasn't just that she had acquired the system that rejected her. It was that she had transformed it so completely that such rejection was no longer possible. The orphan denied school entry had not just bought the education system. She had reimagined what education meant, who it served, and how it functioned in society. And in doing so, she had ensured that no child would ever again be told they lacked the proper documentation to learn.